daawadayaal ku soo dhawaada Bekri Media barnaamij gaar ah ayaan uga hadlaynaa oo ku saabsan booliska magaalada Toronto qaar kamida oo hogaamiyaashooda ay ku jiraan iyo bulshada Soomaalida oo ku kulmay magaalada Toronto iyagoo ka arrinsaday sidii loo horumarin lahaa arrimaha dhalinyarada inta barnaamijku uu socday waxa la isku weydiiyay su'aalo oo bulshadu ay weydiinayeen booliska taasoo ku saabsan sidii wax looga qaban lahaa dhibaatooyinka haysta dhalinyarada inta badan boolisku waxa ay ka hadlayeen sidii loo horumarin lahaa dhibaatooyinka maaragtana wax looga qaban lahaa loona horumarin lahaa arrimaha dhalinyarada community-ga ayaa barnaamijkan aad iyo aad uga hadlay waxa soo qabanqaabiyay ururka Today oo maaragtay ciyaaraha iyo arrimaha dhalinyarada horumarintooda aalaaba lagu yaqaano inta badan dadku waxay ka wada hadlayaan sida dhibaatooyinka loo afsajari lahaa sidaan ognahay magaalada Toronto waxay ka mid tahay magaalooyinka dhalinyarada Soomaalida ay dhibaatooyin badan ku qabaan dilal badan ayaa ka dhacay oo qaarkood aanan la xalinin boolisku waxay sheegeen in ay wadaan baaritaan oo had iyo jeer ay isku dayaan inay xaliyaan dhibaatooyinka inkastoo ay sheegeen kiisaska qaar in ay waqti badan ay qaadanayaan haddaba qaar ka mid ah dadkii hadlay iyo oo su'aalo weydiinaya booliska iyo waxaad ku soo dhawaataan booliska oo ka jawaabaya su'aalihii la weydiiyay iyagoo labada dhinacba afka Ingiriisiga ay markaasi wax isku weydiinayeen isla markaana boolisku ay ku jawaabayeen.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome to today's conversation. Thank you so much everyone for being here today as a guest member, and thank you so much to the Toronto Police and distinguished guests who are here today for our amazing conversation that we're hoping to have. Before we begin, I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement, and then we're going to get into introductions, and then we're going to go into our conversation for today. So we acknowledge the land that we are meeting on today is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 within the Mississaugas of the Credit. So now I'm going to pass it off to Huda to give us an introduction for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start this off by thanking everyone for coming here today. We are here to discuss the dialogue between Toronto Police and the Somali community. Organized by Today, a non-government funded organization started by the members to create events to shine a light on the positive efforts of the Somali community. Through community work, charity organizations, sports events that cater to Somalis all over the world, with the help of donations, volunteers, and communities throughout the GTA. The youth engagement, with the help of Toronto Police, is here today to open a dialogue to discuss and find ways to combat the gun violence that is plaguing our city. Gun violence has affected not only the victims, but their families and the communities. This trauma has affected not only the parents, but the youths and their surrounding communities. Gun violence has prevented children from living a normal life. This fear has followed through to the younger generations. Following an open dialogue can show that we are here not only to speak on these issues, but to put our words into actions. Our community has started this dialogue for many years without any assuring outcomes, and we are here today with our genuine efforts to apply the necessary pressure on Toronto Police to work together to come to a resolution. This attempt to find solutions to this epidemic will not be our first, nor will it be our last. Somalis have been at the center of preventing youth on youth, as well as gun violence, as preventing future generations from becoming victims of this pressing issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huda, for that. And I realized I didn't even introduce myself. So assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Asha Dahid, and today I'm going to be the facilitator today for the conversation. So now we're going to give it up to the TPS staff who are here to just introduce who's going to be here to answer some of the questions we have, and then we'll get into the questions. So whoever wants to start.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us, and I'm honored to be here tonight to speak with all of you. My name is Michelle Oshevsky, and I'm a detective sergeant at the Gun and Gang Task Force and Centralized Shooting Response Teams, along with our gang unit.
Good evening, everyone, and assalamu alaikum. My name is Kelly Skinner. I'm the superintendent and district commander of both 11 and 12 Division. Myself and my inspector, Paul Kropchuk, just started in these divisions about 2 months ago, so we're really excited to be here. We thank you for inviting us, and we're really looking forward to building a strong relationship with the community here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Krofchek, and like my boss said, I am the second in command at 12 Division. I started there about in August, so I am learning lots as we go, but I'm very happy to be here, and I really appreciate the invite here tonight. I think it's so important to have these discussions, and most importantly, you have my word that we will listen deeply and empathetically. Okay, it's not just about hearing each other, but actually listening and understanding each other. So thank you again.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Dominy. I'm a staff sergeant here at 12 Division, currently in charge of the NCO program, the Neighborhood Community Officers. I guess my official title would be the Community Staff Sergeant, and I overlook most of the community aspects and complaints throughout the division. Some of you I know because I already work closely with you. The others I look forward to meeting. Sorry. So once again, thank you for having me here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. I appreciate the invite. My name's Julia. I'm an officer with the Toronto Police Service. I currently work in the Gun and Gang Unit within the Integrated Gang Prevention Task Force. So we have, it's a relatively new unit. I'm hoping some of you have heard about it. I do see some familiar faces, which is great. Our work is very much community-based, which I hope to get a chance to tell you about. We're not an enforcement unit as part of the G&G unit. But we work very closely with members of the community, and Project Engage 416 is our project that's up and running.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kevin Sarju. I'm from Toronto Police Service, Gun and Gang Task Force, and in the gang side. So we look at the conflicts within the communities across the city and across the province, and we try to get a better understanding. And we've been trying to keep up with what's happening and trying to solve investigations and so on. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much to the Toronto Police Service for being here today. And this is all what we're hoping to have today, is to really integrate the community with the Toronto Police and really having in-depth conversation that we can all hopefully open a dialogue. So I'm gonna open it up to our first question that we have. So just to give everyone a flow of, inshallah, how we're gonna be doing this, I'm gonna say it in English and then in Somali. So we're hoping that we're gonna have 9 questions for today, and we're gonna ask the questions to the Toronto Police, and they're gonna answer the questions, and at the end, we're hoping to have an open dialogue to open it up to anyone who wants to ask any other questions. Midway, inshallah, we're gonna break from Maghrib to prayer, and then we'll continue on. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put your hand up, stop us. We're really hoping for this to be an engaging conversation. So inshallah in Somali, I hope it's not broken, but inshallah, sida usameynayna 9 questions ahaysana dadka oo Toronto Police weydiinayna. So dadka inshallah questions kaasay haystaan, and then Maghrib time ka break ka qaadayna, biyo iyo refreshments ahaysana dadka dan break usameyni karaan inshallah. And then following questions, we'll continue the questions. Hadoti, any other questions or dad kasta haystaan, wala weydiin kara, anything, just gacan tag, iska tag, wala jawaba inshallah. We're hoping to have conversation on no fi'an or no muhim with the Toronto Police inshallah. So I'm gonna give it to Huda to answer our first question.
A lot of responses to crime tend to be reactionary rather than preventative. Are there any programs or supports that the police departments are connected to that can help rehabilitate or combat this issue towards Somali youth that we haven't been made aware of?
I'll just start off, and then I'll send it over to the people who are doing all of that really, really good work to do this. And I think what's most important is communicating what we're doing so that everyone is aware. And it's a two-way street, obviously. So I'll start with Julia, who's a part of our Gang Prevention Task Force, a fairly new unit, so 2 years, I think, Julia?
Yeah, it's actually started in 2016, but it's been rolling out officially for the past 2 years.
Right, so I'll let her talk a little bit about Engage 416, some of the work that's being done in the community, more of a prevention, a gang prevention focus, and let her tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll move into Michelle here, and she can give you a little bit more information about the Centralized Shooting Response Team and the Gun and Gang Task Force. And then I think we'll even reach out to our people from the city here, Serena and Scott, to talk about some of the city programs and how we partner with them when there's any type of violence or crisis in a community. Julia?
And just so you understand kind of how our unit came to be, in 2016 we felt the need to develop more of a community response to gang prevention and the gun and gang violence in the city. So we're kind of that arm of that type of work within the Toronto Police Service and the Gun and Gang Unit. Our program is called Project Engage 416, Initially, it took about 4 years to develop, so this was not something that was taken upon quickly or lightly. We did a lot of research and a lot of investigation as to other programs around the world that might have been successful. We ultimately ended on a comprehensive gang prevention model that was brought forward from the Office of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Program, which is a US-based program. Unfortunately, I know we hear a lot, well, we're Canada, we're not the US, and I completely agree with you, but this was never done in Canada before, so we had to unfortunately look south of the border to get a bit of an idea of how we can go about this and what programs were actually working. So we did base it upon that program. However, we put a lot of effort and tweaked it to be something that would work within our particular city in the city of Toronto. Prior to that, we also ran from September of 2019 to March of 2020, we ran 31 gang prevention town halls across the city of Toronto. We made sure that those town halls were available to everybody. They were basically run in 31 of the most impacted gun and gang communities, the lowest equitable, hardest hit communities. We opened up our doors and we met with people, and like I said, we did 31 of them across the city. The development of Project Engage was based on the feedback from the community. So one of the biggest things about our gang model is that it has to be community-based. We wanted to give you guys the voice to understand what is it that we're not doing, what can we do better, and what do you guys need? How are we gonna work together with you guys to make this something that could actually be effective and be working within the community? So we did put a lot of emphasis on the voice of the community when we developed Project Engage. I think that that's a really important piece, and we still try to do that as we move forward. So we have rolled out Project Engage. Initially, it's been a very grassroots approach. Because it's a pilot project, it's only up and running currently in the northwest quadrant of the city. So we work in 23 division, 12 division, and 31 division. It is meant to go citywide, but we don't know, we don't have the firm answer on that yet, but it is looking like it will go citywide. So right now in the pilot project in the northwest quadrant of the city, we've been going out to neighborhoods on foot, not in uniform, dressed like I am today, and we literally go into the neighborhoods we know are impacted by gun and gang violence, whether you have youth or people or family members that are involved in it, or whether you're impacted just by virtue of where we live or where you live. We literally go door to door and try to talk to as many people as we can. When we're going door to door in the community and meeting community members that live in these neighborhoods, we also offer any sort of supports and services that they may need. We have educational supports that we offer, if it's tutoring or somebody needs help with school, or maybe there's somebody that wants to take on a trade and learn how to do that and they don't know how to move forward on that. Any sort of educational supports, we have that and we offer it. We also have employment resources that we offer. If there's anybody in the household that is not working and needs work, wants to work, is having a hard time getting a job, we'll make sure that we connect you to resources for that. And then of course we have the counseling component. So we know that there's challenges with PTSD by virtue of things that you've maybe experienced. There's sometimes addiction issues, anxiety, depression, all of that. So any sort of counseling and emotional supports that are needed, we also offer. We also make sure that those services are offered to anybody that lives in that household. It doesn't matter if you're a child, if you're a parent, if you're an adult, it doesn't matter. We want to make sure that people in the community have access to make sure that you're feeling healthy, that you're educated, and that you have income. Those are the three big pieces that we focused on, and like I said, we go door to door and offer these services, and if somebody's not home, we leave a pamphlet on the door and make sure that we hope that you read it and that you know that those services are available. So that's the one main sort of component of trying to educate the community as to what we're doing. On top of that, over the first sort of 6 months, we developed neighborhood teams where we invited, every time we would go to a community and go door to door, we asked every resident, is there somebody here that would like to have a voice into their own community? Are they willing to meet with us once a month, come to the table? We'll have police there, we'll have Toronto housing reps there, we'll have City of Toronto workers. We're happy to bring all of these people together once a month and have you as residents and representation of your own community have a voice, come to the table. Tell us what the challenges are. Tell us what you're up against. Tell us what's difficult. Tell us what you need. Tell us how we can help you. We have worked really, really hard to try and give you that voice. And those meetings have been held on a monthly basis, and we do it per neighborhood. So for instance, in 12th Division, I've narrowed 12th Division down and broken it down into 4 neighborhoods because we know that different neighborhoods have different challenges. Different communities have different challenges. So in 12th Division, I have it broken down to there's the rustic community, there's the Keelsdale Eglinton West community, there's Brookhaven Amesbury, and then Weston and Mount Dennis. So I do the meetings for each of those neighborhoods separately because I want those residents to feel like we're talking about your neighborhood. So that's been a really important piece. I've had great success with getting community members that are already doing great work and engaged in the community out to my meetings. However, I have to be honest, I've had very little success getting the residents and the people that live there to have a voice. So we've tried everything. I don't know if it's because it's police-led, but if somebody else wants to organize a meeting and just invite me to it, I'm happy to do that too. I have found actually recently that seems to work a little bit better. I get more residents that way. But we are trying, I can promise you that we are trying to give you an opportunity to have a voice. I've been holding these meetings for 2 years on a monthly basis. And I'm getting very little community involvement from the actual residents. So I open that to all of you. I would love to have anybody at that table and have that opportunity to hear your voice and to see if there's ways we can do this on a monthly basis. So that kind of sums up a lot of the work that we're doing now and within the community. So thank you.
And I hope that if you take what Julie is saying to heart, and in these 4 neighborhoods, if you have a good representative for each one of these neighborhoods, and you'd like to partner with Julie to help bring more residents, and if you're holding the meeting or hosting the meeting, maybe you'll have more people that trust you and understand and come to the meetings. Because I think this is the only way we're going to improve our relationship. Relationships are required too. And so if we're here and we're willing, we want to build that trust back. We want to develop these relationships, so we'll need your support, right? And so I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who can talk about our centralized shooting response team and kind of our enforcement arm and some of the preventative work and the groups that they work with.
Okay, so like I said, I'm part of the centralized shooting response team at the Gun and Gang Task Force. And historically, you may not know that the shootings themselves were investigated individually by each of our 17 divisions across the city. And it wasn't as effective. There was a lot of breakdown in communication. So we know that the shootings, a lot of the times, are retaliatory in nature, and they don't stick within divisional boundaries or city boundaries for that matter. They actually travel across the city, and because of the breakdown, unfortunately, the solve rate wasn't that good, and the investigations were not as thorough as they could have been. So the service as a whole recognized this, and what we did back in 2019, we had a pilot project, and we took officers from each of those divisions and centralized the shooting response teams. We brought them all into the same unit as the Gun and Gang Task Force, and by doing this, just physically alone, having all of the investigators in one building, one room, we found that in itself increased the communication on all of these investigations. But a large part of that was that we still had to remain, keep the communication open with the actual divisions themselves. So it was a pilot project. It became a permanent entity. And we now have 8 teams that are investigating the shootings across the city. All the teams are assigned to specific areas, so they're very familiar with what's happening in their divisions. And the communication model across the city is phenomenal. We have intelligence, we have our gang unit, but we communicate with your divisions on a daily basis. Every time there's a shooting that occurs, the divisions are updated thoroughly with respect to the investigation, and we keep them updated as the investigations progress. But we also rely on the divisions to assist us with these investigations. They have the intelligence within their area as well, and also the community. They have the ear of their community within the area. So it became a permanent entity. We've now had it in place for 3 years, and very happy to say that the solve rate has increased substantially in these violent crimes. The communication model is really what's made it very effective. And I worked at the Gun and Gang Task Force for many years in a covert capacity. And Gun and Gang was only covert. It was a proactive unit investigating firearm offenses. and arresting individuals in possession of firearms. Because of that and the covert nature, we were not able to attend community meetings. We couldn't interact openly with the community at risk of compromising our investigations and our identity. But now that we've brought the centralized shooting response teams, we recognize the need for us as well to get out with the community and speak and interact with all of you, as you are the voice and you're the eyes and ears in your communities, and you can hear and see and know what's happening. So now I sit in front of you, something we've never done as a service, and it's made a significant impact, that in itself. And one other thing that we've also recognized is the community support and city support within the city itself. The importance of engaging in the communities that are impacted by gun violence immediately. So because the communication we have with the division itself, we're able to immediately identify the neighborhoods that have been impacted by each individual shooting investigation, whether it be the area where the shooting has occurred or an area where the victims reside, which may be different. We provide them with this information immediately, and then the divisional crime manager is able to reach out to the city support groups, community engagement, and engage the communities immediately that are impacted. It's not always the victims. The victims sometimes refuse victim services. They refuse the community supports. But we recognize that you living within these communities are still impacted. Your families are impacted, your children are impacted. And just like Julia has said, they are reaching out, knocking on doors, and we also have the city supports that we advise immediately where they need to go and offer that support. So it's just one further step that we've done to improve the support to you.
And I didn't know if Serena or Scott, if you wanted to touch base on when a violent incident happens in a community, and we understand that, you know, we come in, we do an investigation, but we understand that more support needs to go to the community members who are affected. And what we do is when we're notified as unit commanders or district or divisional commanders from Michelle's team that an act of violence has occurred, then we know that we need to connect with the city to ensure that somebody is going in after us to deal with the community to make sure that they have all the support that they need. So I don't know if Serena or Scott, if you want to add to that program and what that looks like and how that communication works.
I was just saying good evening and thank you for having us here. I'm Serena, as mentioned, and I work with the city's Community Safety and Wellbeing Unit. And so what I think would be great to share here is some of the programs that we have, that we work in partnership with some of you, as you may already know, other community partners and agencies along with Toronto Police Service. So the Community Crisis Response Program is one of those. Folks may be familiar with some of our team members, our community development officers who work with that team. And that program specifically is responsive to addressing incidents of gun violence and community violence. So as mentioned, when something happens in the community, we work with various communities in different ways. There's a couple different pathways of that, but being responsive to what those immediate needs are. So we know that there's increasing impact and increasing exposure happening in community across the city, and in particular communities where we know it's escalated. So we prioritize those communities and look at how best to bring in the right resources. That could be mental health supports, that could be investments in terms of dollars to support local initiatives, projects, things that would be responsive to community healing, capacity building, or really having community have the resources needed to identify for yourselves around what's best and what's needed. And so the Community Crisis Response Program is a program that responds to the immediate. It responds to the ongoing needs in community by working with groups, safety networks, different grassroots organizations, agencies to do that as well as looking at some of the longer-term planning and strategies that come along with that as well too. So there's some of the immediate pieces, some of the short-term, looking at some of the recommendations around solutions and how to do some of the preventative work, as well as some of the long-term pieces. One of the things that we have in there is our Community Crisis Response Fund, which is a fund that can be applied to by community. It could be a resident group, it could be through a grassroots, it could be through an agency that is responding to something that's traumatic that's happened in community. So there's up to $5,000 that can be applied for, that community identifies how they want to use that. So what would be helpful towards healing? helpful towards recovery from what's been exposed to or what's been experienced. And so that fund is available after an incident happens. Now, I know that that's the after, so it's responsive to, but there's also some prevention in there as well too. So how do we bring community to a place of either enhancing capacity or bringing in different resources to look at prevention as well too? So that's one of the things that's a part of that program. Another great piece is our community violence, wellness, and recovery element of the program. And so we know that there's some gaps in our ability to be responsive in community with sometimes wait lists and periods of getting access to services and supports. So we recognized that and worked with community partners and agencies. So we have 9 partners that we work with to streamline referrals. So referrals for youth arts-based healing, referrals for counseling supports, referrals for case management. So things that are really important in the immediate that we know that there's challenges in accessing once there's been something traumatic that's happened. So we do have that as part of the program as well, that we work with culturally specific groups as well too. So some of the agencies are that as well, and definitely looking at a trauma-informed approach as well too. So happened, why, how can we best support, and who's best to support you? It may not be the city, it may not be us, it may be a local group or agency that's better suited, and we fund them to do that. Another one of our programs is Towards Peace. It's a program that's being piloted in the Northwest, intended to hopefully, through learnings be expanded, but right now we're focused in the Northwest, so Jane and Finch in Jamestown. And that's a model that is built off of some great learnings from other models. So we take learnings from, you might have heard of Cure Violence, for example. So we take learnings from other models in, different American cities, in the UK, et cetera, to say, how do we create something that's different, that can be responsive to wraparound supports for individuals who may already be justice involved, so already have experience with the justice system, who may already be on a path or trajectory that they need immediate response or attention and resourcing. So we have grassroots groups that we work with in the Northwest, and agencies. The community health centers, for example, both Rexdale and Black Creek are some of our partners, to identify individuals who could be referred into the program, do some wraparound supports with them as well too, so that they can have some immediate response to what are those risks right away. So if it's housing, if it's not being in a safe, environment, if it's employment, if it's, mental health supports, whatever is identified, that's a part of the wraparound supports as well too. So we're hoping that from those learnings from that program that we can expand that more, and we're always looking at how best to include the right supports in that model as well too. So we're always open to hearing from community on how to continue to improve these programs and how to better connect with community. I'll stop there for now. That's a lot of information.
Thank you. So you can see there are a lot of programs, and we're working with these agencies to try to do better. And I think maybe the issue is maybe we're not communicating that well. So hopefully this is the beginning, this discussion is the beginning of continued communication with the community, so that these lines of communication stay open, so if something happens, something violent happens, we have an immediate response, and we have agencies that are outside of us that can help, right? And that we have our prevention and our gang prevention program that will also help. So we can reach out to Julie and engage 416 and this task force. So we do have things in place, and I think it's a problem of it's an issue of not getting that information out enough. So I think this is a great start to getting that information out there. And we hope you take that information. If you need more from us, ask, and you share that amongst your groups and your peer groups.
Thank you so much for that, Kelly, and I think that's the biggest thing from after hearing all the programs that are being offered. Thank you so much, Julia, Michelle, and Serena, for providing that insight. I think the biggest thing is the lack of resources on knowing what programs are out there, what is there for the community, and how to access them, because access is the biggest piece and the biggest issue that a lot of our community faces on what resources are out there after an incident happens, or what can we tap into before an incident happens for that prevention piece or even that response piece. So it's great to hear that there's amazing things from like Engage 416, so that we're all able to take advantage of and really hear about for our community. So we're going to now get into the second question.
Hi, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Wise, and I'm asking the second question today. Are there any protocols or transparency processes that hold the TPS, the Toronto Police Service, accountable for any wrongdoings or harmful behaviors within the Somali community?
I thank you for your question. I think everyone would agree that effective policing is based on community trust. Without that trust, we aren't an effective police service, right? There's lots of ways we earn that trust, but one of the ways is that that the community understands that there is accountability and oversight of the police. So today I wanted to give you some of the ways that we do have oversight and accountability that you may not be aware of. First off, some of you may be aware of the OIPRD. So that's the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. And that is, they're responsible for investigating all complaints against the police in all of Ontario. They manage them. They'll either investigate them themselves, or if it's more minor in nature, sometimes they get sent to the police service themselves to investigate by officers who are trained and whose sole duty is to investigate complaints against officers. You can go to a police station and get a form and fill it out, or you can actually sit in your home and get online with your phone or computer and go to the website oiprd.on.ca and make a complaint that way. So it's very easy to do, and that will be investigated. We also at Toronto Police have our professional standards who are responsible for investigating serious criminal investigations that police officers do, or conduct issues. At every division, we also have the unit complaints coordinator, whose job is to investigate less serious investigations and to come to resolutions when complaints happen against police. Some of the other things that we do, for instance, that you may not be aware of, every time a police officer pulls out their weapon in public, their service firearm, that they must fill out paperwork. Every time they pull out their taser, even just to have it out of their holster, there is paperwork that has to be completed. Every police car, marked police car in the City of Toronto, has an in-car camera system that records whenever, for instance, when officers go in to turn on their emergency lights, it automatically goes back 30 seconds to what was recorded 30 seconds before that, and then continues recording, not only video, but audio. Every officer that's in uniform who's in priority response right now has a camera on them. You'll see it in the middle of their vest. They'll typically have a camera here. That is turned on when they are engaging the public in certain instances. If they're just chatting with you friendly, it may not be on, but if it is on, they will advise you that it's on. These type of things are actually reviewed randomly by supervisors at each division. So supervisors will randomly check these videos for proper conduct, and if anything is incorrect, it'll be properly investigated. And not only that, but there's certain times where our procedures require us to actually investigate. So if an officer is involved in a pursuit in a police car, then that is reviewed. That video from the police is, from the in-car camera system is reviewed. Things like that. We were also the first police service to start releasing our procedures. So if you type into Google and you go Toronto Police Service Procedures, it will take you to copies of exactly what officers are expected to do in terms of certain instances. So if I go there now, for instance, we have procedures for arrest, search of persons, we have persons in custody, we have missing persons, we have lots, we have body-worn camera, for instance, what the officer must do when they must turn on their body-worn camera. That's all for everyone to be able to see and publicly available, and we are the first police service to do that, and we're proud of that, and we've worked closely with the community to release those procedures. We also have things such as like I said, if we use force on an individual, then paperwork must be filled out. Then in course of that paperwork being filled out, we will review the videos as well. And if there's an injury to someone, again, paperwork is filled out and reviewed by at least 3 levels of supervisors. So there's a lot of accountability and oversight in policing, but it's needed and it's important. And I'm happy to answer any questions later on if anybody has some in regards to that.
We're going to get into our third question now.
Greetings and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I have the privilege of asking the third question. My name is Zachary Abdul. very familiar with many of the policies and procedures that the officers have spoken about today, and also the programs the City of Toronto offers. So I'm really going to encourage us to allow the community to start providing some broader feedback as we move along in this conversation, so we can think of some innovative solutions of how we can work together, because trust is something that is, easily lost and very hard to get. And I think your organization has learned that as a service for the past decade. We've had many conversations about trust and transparency, and a lot of people have, poured out their pain and their hurt regarding to building a relationship with the police services. So I wanted to provide that preamble before I ask the third question. So the question states here: why hasn't the neighborhood officer program been made aware of our community? These efforts and are government mandated and funded through taxpayers. However, this is a program that many of the community are unaware of, that has been built to keep the community safe. And why is that? And what I'll quickly just state to support that question, I think what the question is trying to ask, just to kind of whittle it down a bit further, is that is the community being adequately engaged on what this program is about and how it can work with the Somali community? A lot of communities across Toronto are very distinct, right? The Somali community, as you're aware, it's a community that's Black and it's also Muslim, right? It's a community that has intergenerational challenges, but also is willing to put forward intergenerational solutions. So when we look at this neighborhood officer program, is the Toronto Police Service willing to explore more creative ideas of how a program like that could work with the Somali community?
So just to start, the mere fact that this question is on this paper today is concerning to me. I will tell you that I'm only going to speak about 12th Division and our current NCO program, because I can't really speak to the other divisions in which you may reside. I will tell you that our NCO program at 12th Division is very aware of the Somali community. We do have a large Somali community here in 12th Division. Currently, we have 4 of our 8 neighborhoods that have designations as neighborhood community neighborhoods, and each one of those neighborhoods have 4 officers. I'm just going to go through a little bit about what the program is, just so you have a bit of an understanding, because once again, the fact that the question is here tells me that either we're not doing our job in getting our information out there, or there's a failure here somewhere, clearly. So, first of all, our NCO officers are police officers. They do perform the duties of regular police officers. They're easily identifiable because they wear a bit of a different uniform, something a little less aggressive than what regular police officers would wear. You'll see them in your communities on bike drives, sock drives, all kinds of things like that. We stay in touch with our people at Loft because they offer quite a few different services as well. We come out to any event that they do. But probably our biggest impact on the community, I would think, in relation to engaging with the different communities is through sports. And I had heard earlier, somebody mentioned about the Somali soccer programs and such, and we're very familiar with the one that takes place over at Weston Road. We're very familiar with the one that's at Centennial Park as well. If there's an engagement piece that we can be a part of in relation to any of those sporting events that you guys have, not only will we come, but we will come in numbers. We will be there, we will engage with you, we will help you, we will give you every resource that we can possibly give you. So, like to say, just to kind of get back to the question, if we're aware of the Somali community, absolutely. We're very, very aware. We are trying to communicate, educate, get our programs out there the best ways that we can. Like I say, we utilize our community partners to assist us. They utilize us as well. The 4 communities that we currently have officers assigned to in this in 12th Division would be our Weston neighborhood, Weston Lawrence area, Rustic neighborhood, which includes Falstaff. Probably saw our community officers at a lot of the Falstaff meetings in relation to firearms violence over the last couple of years, because believe me, we've been at every single one of those meetings, myself included. The ones that the mayors have attended, the one that the chief has attended. There was a camera asked for. That's the fastest Toronto police camera that's ever been installed, I swear, in the city of Toronto anywhere, is the one at Falstaff. Because we had members of the Somali community ask for that camera, and we made that an instant priority And like I say, I've never seen one go up quicker anywhere than that one. So we are listening. I feel bad that you feel that we're not aware of you, because we certainly are. We have Beachboro Greenbrook and Rockcliffe Smythe, which is the Woolner area, and as you know, that's been plagued with a fair bit of firearms violence too over the last 2 years, but it's severely dropped as a result of our efforts, the efforts of the TCHC. We were over there, we were doing a safety audit on the whole premise, a whole bunch of stuff got changed. So I guess my recommendation is, you know who I am now, you know who the bosses here are from 12th Division, you know what our neighborhood officers look like within the community, extremely approachable. Approach any one of us at any time, send me an email. Whatever it is that you need from our neighborhood officer program, we will be there to support you the best that we possibly can. And I will 100% guarantee that, along with everybody else sitting at this table. And I don't know if you guys have anything you'd like to add, or?
I wanted to ask you specifically, Zachary, what do you think are some of the roadblocks that exist right now that aren't allowing the community, I mean, for the youth to even ask this question, makes us, and I heard Paul say this, what is happening that you don't know, because we are out there, and we need that engagement. We need to build that relationship and build that trust. So what do you think some of the roadblocks are, and how we can on our ends work towards it, and what are your suggestions for the community as well to help improve that relationship?
Yeah, no, officer, I'd like to thank you for asking us a question, and I don't speak for all the Somali youth. As a matter of fact, I recently no longer became a youth, so I'm holding on. I'm holding on for dear life, as you can see. But what I also would like to add is that I want to address you by your name. So if you could repeat your name.
It's Kelly.
Kelly, and is there a certain rank I should address you by?
No, you can call me Kelly.
Okay, awesome. So Kelly, to move toward addressing your question, I think this is a part of what the community engagement can look like going forward. I don't feel comfortable speaking on behalf of my entire community. I'm here as somebody who got asked like 5 minutes ago to jump in the seat, literally. And what I would say is I think the Toronto Police Service needs to really take a hard look at exploring innovative jurisdictional solutions across very similar communities on how the neighborhood officer program and the lessons learned since it was launched, I believe it was launched in 2018, correct? Was it 2018, 2016?
Basically a full launch in 2018.
So 2018 it launched, right?
Years,
so and 2 years were taken away, I imagine, with the pandemic. So what lessons were learned from a lot of that work? And then how can you apply those lessons directly to community feedback, right? I know you're doing incredible work with Medinta with the historic Toronto Police Service Board Agreement, but I like what you said, and I never got your name, sir?
Paul.
Paul, what you outlined about sport, I think the organization hosting this event today believes in the power of sport. And I think, thinking of those type of creative solutions and how you can ally with them and work with them around what this neighborhood officer program could look like, particularly for the Somali community, to not only increase engagement, which has been something that the Toronto Police historically has been committed to, but also enhancing trust. So I don't have a direct solution, Kelly, but I'm happy to continue the conversation with you afterward. But I really encourage the service to think about some creative solutions, There are people in the community who like employment opportunities to play some role in supporting the neighborhood officer program, right? Finding ways to support the community coming out of the pandemic, where safety issues didn't stop when people were told to stay in their home, right? The violence, as you know, in Northwest Toronto was steady throughout the pandemic. It didn't stop where a lot of the Somali community lives. So Kelly and Paul and your entire team really encourage you to, Scott and Serena with the Towards Peace program are trying to implement such stated solutions. But so having a sort of, more of a overarching approach that is targeted based on community feedback would allow the Toronto Police Service to continue to enhance its transparency. And as you mentioned, an officer, you spoke to the procedures. I never got your name, sorry?
It's Paul.
Paul, okay, wow. Okay, well, awesome. Okay, Paul. That's a common thing that happens in the Somali community. We have a lot of the same name too. I don't know if you were told that. But I leave you, Kelly and Paul with, there are a lot of people doing this work in the community. So having more targeted conversations about what solutions that can be brought forward, I think is the best way to go. And what you just did, Kelly, and putting a question back to me, is helping engage folks. You can tell their eyes started to shift more towards you all. So hopefully we can take the approach the rest of the night. Thank you.
Sorry, I'd just like to add on to that. Sorry. I think the biggest question is because this program has been established and you know about it, but we don't know about it. So I think the question is, how can we be made aware of this? Is it through community? Is it through the schooling systems? Because when I went to school, we used to have police officers come in for an assembly. And obviously it's different now. Should it be plastered on Toronto community housing buildings? Because as much as we would like to have something like this all the time, it's not feasible. You know, people have work, people have school, we're all busy. But I think the initial question is, how can we know about this? Because us as youth, we can figure it out, but our parents who are a bit older, not as tech savvy, they want to be made aware of the situation as well. So like he said, the biggest thing is trust as well, but along with trust comes communication. So beyond just, by the way, we have this program, and like you said, you guys do door knocking, right? You guys come in plain clothing. I think a lot of that needs to be established more for us to know that the effort is really being put on, so we know that we can rely on you guys when the time is needed.
Could I just add one little thing just about how to contact our community officers?
Yeah.
If you go onto the Toronto Police Service website, every neighborhood that's been designated a community officer neighborhood is there. All of the officers and their contact numbers are also there. So that website will not only just tell you if you have a neighborhood officer, because we do have a lot of neighborhoods that do not have them. But for the ones that do, it will tell you, and it will tell you who they are and how to contact them directly. Most of them will have their phone numbers right on that website, including our 12 division guys. So feel free to reach out to them, feel free to look it up there. And for anybody who's not tech savvy, maybe the meetings like what we're doing, I mean, this is obviously a great benefit to everybody here. But just walk in the 12 division and say, hey, what do you guys get going on for the community? I'll come downstairs and I'll sit down and talk with anybody anytime about it.
Be careful, he might talk your ear off. He might be there for a while.
Thank you.
Kidding.
Just to answer your question pertaining to how you guys can be familiarized with the officers. So the neighborhood community officer program, we've changed the mandate because through education and learning, right? The officers are going to be designated to that neighborhood for 4 years. So for example, say I live in a building with you, and you see me in the lobby the first time, you're probably not going to say hello. But if you see me the third, fourth, or fifth time, you might say hello to me, right? So one of the ways of us getting you to create a communication or create a better community is by being in the buildings often, so it'll be the same officers going to be there for 4 years minimum. So that relationship is there. So they're not there for a year and move on and somebody else, and then you got to rebuild that entire relationship, right? So that's one of the ways of us getting that neighborhood community officer out there and getting it to the community. That's one physical way.
Members of marginalized groups often feel unsafe or overwhelmed when police officers are around. Can you say that as a police officer that you understand where this feeling comes from? And if you do, why? And if not, why not?
This is easy for me to answer. Do I get a sense of that, how weak they can be intimidating when a police officer approaches someone from a marginalized community? And the only reason I say that's easy is because even though I've been a police officer for over 26 years, if I'm driving and there's a police officer behind me, I actually get nervous to this day with a police officer behind me, and I'm not a member of a marginalized community. So I can appreciate, especially our uniform can be intimidating, right? It's someone in uniform, especially if kids have been taught, well, this officer catches bad people and all this, that can be intimidating. So I do appreciate that. With that said, we have been trying to change what we do. We have definitely made mistakes. And just give you, before I pass it over to Superintendent, who can speak to how we, for instance, are educating people better to understand what their rights are around police officers. Even the way we conduct our enforcement has changed in order to not be as intimidating. And to give an example is, when we used to do, say, a big project, what we used to do back in the day was we would come at dawn before the light broke, and we'd come in with our ETF and our SWAT team and big trucks, and we'd come down and arrest about 10, 20, 40 people across the city. And what we found out, and from talking with the community members, was that this was stigmatizing the neighborhoods, right? Because what was the big news? What was the first news that night? In this neighborhood, they arrested this many people. So if you may not have noticed, but over the last, I would say, 3 years, we don't do that anymore. We don't do these big raids because we understand the effect it has on the community, and it's maybe a half dozen people that are causing this problem, and it's not fair on the rest of the community. So we've done things like that to try to change our behavior in the community.
And there's also, and there are other things that we're doing to try to improve and try to educate, and not just the community and the youth on their rights, but also internally. So recently we just released our Know Your Rights campaign. I don't know if you guys are aware, it's knowyourrights.to. And we try to even keep it external from the Toronto Police Service so that the youth and people felt comfortable just going to the site. And there is a slew of information there. We did a series of videos about, and I think we'll talk a little bit when it comes to, if we're talking about carding and how it was, it stopped in 2017, January 1, how it's now illegal, and what your rights are when you're interacting with police. And part of our campaign, when we worked with youth to create these videos and to provide some education on your own rights, is to improve our interactions. And so part of that communication was external. These are your rights when you're in a traffic stop. These are your rights when your person is being searched, your car is being searched, your house is being searched. These are the rights that you have. These are the rights when you're just having a one-on-one conversation with an officer. So this website has all these videos, and it's really important to take a look. And another part of that communication plan was internally, because it's also a good reminder for all of our officers on how the laws have changed, why the laws have changed, and why we ended up where we are, and how to improve our relations and our interactions with the community. So I think that we're working towards it. We're trying to be better because we recognize that we're here, and we're having this discussion of trust because our actions and the actions of police officers in the past have led us here. So we understand that, and we're trying to be better. And we hope that you understand and you see that. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question? I ask this question very respectfully because of the work that I've done going door to door in the community and meeting people face to face like that in such a grassroots way as an officer. When I meet and I go to the door and I meet these families, and oftentimes because it was during COVID, everybody was home, so it was actually quite a great way to meet a lot of people. The vast majority of people living in these neighborhoods are, and I mean like teenagers and kids and kids in school, are doing great things. They're like in post-secondary school, they're studying, they're working, it was so interesting for me to do that kind of work. And when I liked your question because you asked, do we realize that that's how you feel? And I want to know, why do you feel marginalized? Because it makes me sad to think that you actually even feel that to begin with in a city like this.
Well, I feel like it stems from the stigma that you see a police officer and you're scared. For me, example, coming from a Somali, we're refugees, my parents were refugees, coming to a new country, we're not the dominant people here, we're a minority. We're not treated the best, especially in the 90s. Coming now, we are treated better, everyone's treated better. But you learn from your parents, and our parents were affected by racism. They were lower income people, so they're affected by classism as well. And all of that, and which ties into our education from our families, leads to us believing that we're marginalized because we don't have the same opportunities as other people of our age group, and we have to, or we had, and me right now especially, I have to go ahead and do double what some people have to do to get the same results. And yeah, that's the main reason why I feel like I'm marginalized.
It mostly stems from, like he said, trauma that we have either experienced ourselves or we've witnessed. I think the biggest thing is, especially coming from specific areas, like you said, Jamestown, Falstaff, those areas are known for negativity. So anytime we come from those areas, we're automatically afraid that we're going to be assumed as someone involved in these types of activities, and that we're painted under the same light. We're Somali, but we're still black. We might not know that you're not doing towards us, but it's our fear And there's a psychological thing that stems from that. Same way police officers don't want to believe that we look at you all as the same, as that you're all very aggressive and rude to us. We don't want that same light shed on us. So I think that's where it kind of comes from. There's more of, it's kind of a tennis game, if you think of it, you know? We give what we get from Toronto Police. So I feel like the reason why we say we're marginalized is because we've been treated as marginalized.
It's so good that everyone's been talking with each other, networking, and being engaged. Mashallah, it seems like we're having a really good discussion. Before we continue on to our questions, I'm just looking for Ahmed, who's going to say a few words before we continue our conversations.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Greetings, everyone. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. We begin by first praising God Almighty and sending our salutations on our final prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. As to what follows, I'm honored to be invited to this beautiful discussion, this beautiful gathering. Know many of you, we've worked together before. So just a little bit myself, my name is Ahmed Urur. I'm the Director of Education and Youth Coordinator at Khalid bin Walid Mosque. I'm also I work with Delta Found Resource Center as a pre-release and reintegration worker. I've had the pleasure of working with Scott McKinnon before, Zach, Elder Sheikh, many people here. So these type of discussions and these type of conversations are very needed in our community. As a victim of gun violence myself, and also losing a brother to the gun violence, these type of discussions is something that we really need. And I think, one of the questions that should be asked today, and I would love to get a response from the police as well, is why is there a high level of unsolved cases in the Somali community with regards to other ethnicities when they're much lower? So I would love that. The most common question, the most common answer we get is that you do not work with the police. You guys don't come out and work with the police, right? But I think we need, even if the people don't work with the police, what is the police doing in regards to coming and solving these cases? And if you look at the Somali community, we've had over 200 to 300 unsolved gun cases in the past 15, 20 years, So what are we doing to stop this? And I thank you all once again for inviting me. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
And I don't know if it's an education thing, a lack of information. Again, we're talking about that disconnect. So the homicides involving Somali youth in 2022 have a 100% solve rate. So we've solved all of them. So yeah, we have. Last year we solved 100%. So all of the homicides involving Somali youth last year have all been solved. So there are some cases in 2019 that aren't. And when I first got to 12 Division, and Paul and I both started just in early August, and there was the tragic homicide and shooting that occurred. I see, and I know that you guys don't see this, and I understand that, but I want to get this information about what it looks like. Our homicide officers who are maybe at home, they're on call, they get the call, they go out and they work for maybe 3 days straight. They don't go home. And so they came in and they move into 12 Division. There's a room that they come in and they sit in and they work consistently. And I think we can talk about the breakdown in relationship and the lack of trust and why witnesses might not come forward. We understand that. We're working to try to find ways to provide protection. Maybe, Michelle, this might be a good opportunity to talk about what we try to do for witnesses and sources. But I just wanted to say that we're not here to blame and say this isn't happening because you're not talking to us. Yes, we would solve more when it comes to our shootings. They're unsolved in 2019. I'm only going as far back as 2019. But I don't want to sit here and point fingers and say we understand. We understand why it might not happen. So I think this is a first step in building that trust and relationship so you feel comfortable coming to us, right? But we understand, and I just want you to know that the solve rate is better than you think. And maybe we're not, because we don't collect stats by community, but we're able as officers in a division to say, we know our community at 12 Division. We know if a homicide involves a Somali youth. And I can tell you that calling homicide, and we talked to them before this conversation happened, and we have the stats, and they are solved. So we're getting better at it, right? I think video probably helps a lot. Video surveillance, there's video everywhere, and that really helps tell a story. And yes, we do need more witnesses and sources to come forward, but maybe we need to do better about telling that story. We do a press release when an arrest happens, but maybe that press release isn't making it to you. Maybe it's hitting a venue or the major media that you guys aren't getting. So maybe, this press release needs to go specifically to Somali media, right? To say, we solved this homicide yet again. Today, I got an email about a homicide, was it this year? Yeah. When did it happen? That was 2019. So we got an email saying they got a conviction today and he got life in prison. And one of the victims was a Somali victim. So I don't know that information gets out there enough. We got it, and we're happy to see, because those sentences don't come down very often. But the homicide unit messages to all of us to let us know, thank you for all your work. We got this conviction in court today. So yes, we communicate internally, but I think we have to improve how we're communicating this information externally. So I think this is a good step in kind of teaching us or guiding us on how to better communicate our wins and our successes.
Yeah, no, thank you for that response, Kelly. Ahmed, as you mentioned, we've worked together and we've had many of these conversations related to that specific question. I'd also like to add, in terms of transparency and trust building, kudos to you for sharing that. But there's also another side of the fence when it comes to shootings, right? There's victims, right? And that's something that the community, I don't want to speak for them, but it's also should be a part of the conversation, right? What is the Toronto Police Service doing in terms of how are they supporting victims of shootings, right? When shootings do occur to young people in the community or folks in general in the community, how are those families being supported? How are they, providing supports? And I know the city's doing incredible work, but this goes back to a lot of what the city of Toronto has spoken to about the Toronto Police about police reform. I know that's a lot of the conversation with the incoming chief, Myron Demku, who will be starting in December. So I really encourage us to have conversations on what that would mean in terms of how do we support shooting victims as well. And I know you do a lot of good work already, but hopefully nudging that work forward. Thank you.
I think that goes well with my second question, which is it's going to ask how the Toronto Police Service deals with an emergency when it happens, because before we can investigate why an emergency happened, we need to be there. The police needs to be there. And the faster that they are there, the better chances there are for a safer and a more positive outcome. So what are ways that the TPS can help lessen wait times when called for emergency? Have there been a thought of creating a system to monitor call responses within low income areas?
Thank you very much for the question. This type of question actually was brought early to our attention when Roseanne first reached out to us and said that we were going to have this type of meeting. And I'm glad that it was brought to our attention because it caused me to evaluate the call response times in 12 Division. It was one of the first things I did when I arrived there because of your input, so I appreciate that. What I think I'll start with by answering is just explaining what happens if you pick up the call and unfortunately, hopefully, I know some in this room probably have had to pick up the phone and do this, but if you have, just explain what happens when you do call, say, 911. Because some people don't probably know the process and it's important for everyone to understand. So if you call 911, the first thing when it gets answered, it's going to be answered by what we call as a call taker. That person's job is to answer the 911 calls and to determine where that call needs to go, okay? So that first, they decide if it's a police matter, if say it's a shooting, obviously everyone's gonna be coming, not just the police, but also paramedic services and fire, et cetera. But they'll transfer it over to say to the police. Then that dispatcher, then they decide what division this happened in and it all goes from there, right? And then the cars get dispatched. So I only say that because some people think when you're picking and calling 911 that you're literally calling almost the division and cars are getting dispatched right away. There is a slight delay for those things to take place. So I do appreciate, and I've had to call 911 myself in times, that it does seem it can be a long time. So when I evaluated these call response times, and what I did was I just viewed our response to violent crimes against Somalian youth, that is shootings and homicides. And what I found was, because initially, and I don't know where it came from, there was talk about us possibly taking 20 minutes to get to a call. And from what I reviewed, that isn't accurate. And in fact, our call time is pretty well right on what there are standards that are to be met, and our call response time in terms of Somalian youth is right on what they should be. Would we like to improve them? Of course, we would like to improve them. But right now, just to give you some perspective as well, the officers on the street, we are about 700 officers less than we had 15 years ago. That's a significant. There's lots of corporations that aren't even that big, and that's how many we've lost. So the officers who you see typically going by in the cars and responding to calls, they're going call to call to call. As soon as they clear a call, they're going to another one. So sometimes we get lucky. You know, sometimes there's a shooting and we happen to have an officer around the corner or an officer right there. And other times we have to get dispatched and go, and it can take some time. So, you know, we do our best. I can tell you from experience, and I think everyone at this table would agree, especially when it's a shooting or something, we are getting there as quickly as possible. We don't know who the victim is. It doesn't make a difference to us. We want to ensure that public safety and stop the violence and tend to the victim, and that's the most important thing. Let me just check my notes. Another thing just to make note, and it's related to, I said that we have 700 less officers. Lots of people don't know that in Toronto, we have the lowest population of police officers to the general population than any other city. So for instance, in Chicago, there are three times as many police officers, 3 times many police officers per resident. There is, we are the lowest in Canada for a big city in number of police officers per population. So we try our best. We have GPS in cars. We have the latest technology to ensure that our officers are in the right locations and getting them as quickly as possible. But, you know, the reality is that sometimes we aren't right around the corner. It can take us some time. I hope that answers the question somewhat. If you have a follow-up, I'd be glad to take it.
I'll also add too that I think everyone is feeling the pinch, not just law enforcement and policing, but we don't have the people, and we're having a lack of people who actually want to join the police service, so we're struggling. And that's another thing that we'll try to pitch is you know, join the service. The best change happens from within. I knew that. That was told to me 25 years ago, and I would like to think that I've had a positive impact, being Black, being female. So I think that the best change happens when you're inside, and you can make that change. So that's my pitch for recruiting. I'll say that. But I also will say that we understand that we have to do more with less, like a lot of people, like schools, like the city. We're trying to do more with less. So we're doing research to see how we can improve our response times. You know, we've done things like disband our community response unit, so we can increase the neighborhood officers, but we can also put more officers on the road so we can get to these calls faster. Because I don't want to say we're at critical numbers, but we're lower than we have been in you know, over the last 15 years. So we are struggling with that as well, but we're doing everything we can in research. We're trying to find ways to increase our response times.
Thank you for that. And I think just before we get into that question, to tie into how you were mentioning that there's like lower number of police officers that are there. So how is it that the Somali community in particular, like youth, get involved in being, maybe if they want to be a part of the Toronto Police Service, as you mentioned, that's something that could happen. So what are some of the processes, resources, or things that they can do?
Yeah. And this is something that I think I'll be calling our talent acquisition when we leave tonight and saying, okay, they're recruiting everywhere that they possibly can. And maybe it's, you know, we talk with the mosque, we talk to some youth groups and say, can you invite us to come and speak about, you know, what our career entails, what the benefits are, how having more representation from your community would benefit us as a service. So maybe if we have that ability to show them the process. We have practice sessions. We have practice sessions for women only. We have over 2,000 civilian roles in the police service. So you can contribute to the police service if you're not comfortable being a police officer. There are a myriad of ways that you can do that. And I think that comes with education, knowing the different roles that the service has, right? And how you can do that, even if it's not as a police officer. So I think maybe having those information sessions, right? They have practice sessions all the time. We have information sessions. But again, and I think this is like the theme of the night, there's a disconnect with getting that information out. Yeah. So maybe we need to do more of these or have talent acquisition come out and speak to the different groups about what's available and how to go about getting that information.
No, thank you for that. And I definitely agree. I think that definitely is a theme today of just the lack of information, that there's services, there's resources that are there, but it's not knowing how to access it and what to do about it. So thank you for that. And I think that would be a great opportunity to have an information session on that specifically. But we're going to head off to our next question.
Thank you, Asha. In terms of our next question, I wanted to bring this back to something that was raised by community earlier in the conversation tonight. As you know, we're entering the end of a municipal election in the next week or so, and there's been a lot of chit and chatter about one candidate who believes that bringing carding back will decrease gun violence plaguing the city. Personally, I don't agree with it. I see Paul shaking his head profusely, which tells me he doesn't agree with it. Legislation at the provincial level doesn't agree with it. So to just wrap things up, how do you see your organization, Toronto Police Service, ensuring that you're communicating effectively to community if there are concerns that members of our community who are marginalized, who are Black, who are from the Somali community do feel like they're being targeted, carded, or disproportionately impacted by certain enforcement efforts? How do you dispel their concerns and ensure that you're communicating effectively about this practice never returning to the communities across Toronto? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think people will say a lot to try to get elected. I mean, the government, they've legislated that it's banned. Carding was absolutely banned January 1st, 2017. And I think I'm on the PACER committee, and part of that committee's recommendations were, okay, we need to, not only is it banned, I think they actually helped, I wasn't a part of the committee back then, but I think they actually helped form what that legislation was gonna look like based on the work that they were doing. So how do we communicate that information? And that's a big part too of the Know Your Rights campaign. First video goes back to when this actually happened and talking about why it was banned, what it is, what it looks like, and what interactions with police are supposed to look like today, right? The obligations that police have when they interact with you, the questions that you can ask them, and that and there are certain situations where you have the ability to walk away if you don't want to interact, right? There's some situations where you have to, but there's some situations where you don't have to and you can walk away, and you have that right. And I think that's what that campaign really pushes. And we're trying to do it in a way that was really, was easy for everyone to understand, right? And we ask that you share that information with your groups and with your people if you need to.
Yeah, I was shaking my head because it makes me angry even hearing that, right? It's not coming back. It's long gone. We realized that it wasn't effective. And then for the few people it caught, it wrecked communities, right? And wrecked the perception of the trust with police. So it's not coming back. That's the main thing. It is important to note that there are times when police can ask you personal information, right? So at this time, when you're at a traffic stop, if you're driving, if there's a search warrant, if you're being detained or arrested, those are times when people must give their information, and a police officer should be explaining that. But carding is not coming back in like that. There's no place in it for in 2022.
I think what we've been discussing most of the time is not being heard by Toronto Police, and I know you've stated that you're hearing us and that you're effectively trying to change it and find ways for us to be heard. And I think the question is more, and you know this, that we're less likely to report a crime, we're less likely to be as cooperative as you'd like based off of trauma and our experience. So the question is, Somalis are less likely to report a crime due to the harsher punishment that minorities often face. How can Toronto Police Services build a relationship where Somali voices can be heard outside of hearing, we hear you? Is there an effective plan that has been made for you guys to actually hear what we're saying and it's being written down and there's an actual record of it?
So we discussed our equity, inclusion, and human rights unit and how it was one of the first that a police service had created. And I think we needed to hear that voice, right? That non-law enforcement voice to say, you need to communicate better. We need to have more input from the community, and they tell us how we're doing it if we're not doing it right and how to do it better. So maybe I'll have Roseanne answer.
Thank you, good evening. Hello all. So my name is Roseanne Bailey. I'm with Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights. I am they've got this new position called Diversity Inclusion Specialist. I joined the service in 2019, October, just ahead of us rolling out the race-based data strategy. And so does everybody know race-based data strategy? Have you ever heard of it? Again, so the Ontario government had legislated the mandate for all justice sector, including corrections, prisons, parole, all police services throughout Ontario to start collecting race-based data. The race-based data was in an effort to start taking a look at systemic racism. It wasn't trying to see if there was systemic racism. It said that there was, we just needed to figure out what the numbers or what did it look like. And so within that, they looked at one, which was the use of force, and the other one was officer perception. So officer would look at me, they would say I was a black female, and the idea was if an officer's perception of my race had an impact on the use of force that they used on me in the process of being arrested. And so the use of force is anytime an officer takes out a revolver, their weapon, discharge or no discharge, they have to fill out a form. And I know that was said earlier. Same thing with the taser, discharge or no discharge, they still have to fill out a form. Any of their batons still have to fill out a form. Any open hand technique that requires medical attention, they have to fill out a use of force form. And so Toronto Police Service went a little bit further and they added strip search. Now, this was not something new that the Ontario government was doing. Communities have been asking for race-based data for over 40 years. Academics, activists, everybody has been asking for that because they said that there was systemic racism and we need to figure out how to do that. So within the Ontario government, they've basically said, you need to start collecting it. So January the 1st, 2020, we started to collect race-based data on use of force as well as strip search. That came out of a report by an Ontario Human Rights Commission around breaking the golden rule that actually showed an overrepresentation of blacks as well as indigenous communities when it pertained to strip searches. So those were the main two things. So Toronto Police went a little bit further. As of June, we have just released the results of our 2020. And so that was the two interactions. However, as of 2021, we started to look at other interactions, including mental health apprehension, child apprehension, as well as traffic stops. So it's not a project, it really is here, life after. And so we have a number of town halls that we did at the very beginning to inform communities. We did some with Medenta, and we clearly didn't do that with everybody in this room. But we have a number of community town halls that we are, within the next 2 months, are asking members to come out so that we can actually talk about the findings. The findings actually talk about how the service has used use of force and strip search and what those numbers look like. This just gives us a baseline, and from there we can say, if our number is this, then how do we reduce it by 25%? So it gives us a numbers to be able to now judge and be able to do that. But in that is also an accountability process. So out of the findings came 38 recommendations internally that Toronto Police and the Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights with community partners as well as the community advisory panel have put together to be able to say, you know what, these are the things that needs to happen internally to make sure that those numbers go down. We've seen changes in policies and procedures that have decreased the amount of strip search that we've had, and now we're taking a look at what needs to happen with our use of force as well. So part of that is we want to have, at the town halls, we want to have conversation with communities. We know that your lived experiences are not by numbers. You know, you're living this experience. You're not kind of like, I don't want to know what the numbers look like because I know what it feels like. And so we understand that, but we also have a few mechanisms that we've identified internally, and we want to hear from you if there's additional things that we need to actually do in order to make those changes internally. So as I said, it's something that is accountable. We're holding the service accountable. We have to actually report back to community to say, here's what the findings are. And every single Police service has to do the same thing. However, Toronto Police has been the only one who's actually been able to engage with community and say, from the very beginning, this is what we've been doing. Community has said, we want to we want to hear, and we want to hear from you, and we want to have a say into that. So part of that accountability, part of that being able to have these discussions, and the transparency part is very, very vital in terms of being able to say, we know harm is done. We know harm is being done. And there is an accountability process for all of our service members, but we also are allowing community to be able to hold us accountable through the release of this data. Part of the anti-racism data standard from the government is that we cannot use this data to racialize or to stigmatize communities. So we can't say Jane and Finch is this, or we can't use, Chathui is this. We can't use that. It's against the law for us to be able to do that. And so what we're doing is having conversations and taking a look at how we're analyzing the data and being able to be transparent and say, this is how we've done it. So is it that it's the new recruits because of their inexperience that's happening? Is it the day of night? Are we looking at which areas? So if Jane and Finch's, for example, has more Black people, is it that there are more people that are being use of force there, and we're not seeing that correlation? And so the data gives a little bit of a different story, and we want to be able to have that conversation. So I know that's a bit long-winded, but I hope that helps.
So we're just going to turn it over to the next question.
What percentage of Toronto police officers on patrol are actually from the neighborhoods they patrol? For example, a Somali police officer in a Somali dense neighborhood.
That's a very tough question. I'll be honest, because I had a conversation on the break with a gentleman here, and I found out tonight that Ottawa has more Somali police officers than we do. And so I'm like, but why? Like, why is that? There's a reason, right? So we need to find out what that reason is. We don't have very many here in Toronto. So clearly, we have not been making the correct inroads with the community because we don't have the people coming. And, I have never worked in our talent acquisition, our employment section, but I know that the talk there is that we're going out to the communities and we're really working hard. But then something's amiss. Something's going on, right? And why? Why Ottawa? So this has really piqued my interest tonight. And if I know, but I'm serious. If anybody here has been from Ottawa and goes, this is the reason, or has their clues, I'd love to hear it.
Sorry, representation matters. So maybe they've done a little bit more work. So obviously we're calling off, our talent acquisition and say, what are you guys doing? Help us, right? And we need to do that. And we've done that for other services, right? I think we have more Somalian civilian members. I know when I worked in a unit where we did wiretapping and we need translation work, we fought and worked we went to workshops, we had presentations, and we did that with civilians. So I don't know that what that work has been done. I can't speak for them, but I might suggest to them that they call Ottawa and find out what they're doing. But I think maybe having them come out like we do for everything else and talk about recruiting, like we mentioned earlier, is probably a really good idea. And hopefully we have more of a response.
So we have, as Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights, we have taken a look at not only the recruitment process, but the ways in which our standards, our tests, and what are the things that we need to do to actually make accessible the service for all communities. I know that a lot of people have reached out to me and said, hey, I'm interested. And what I normally do is connect them to a recruit officer, a Black recruit officer. And the recruit officer goes through the process with them of all the things that they need to do in order to be able to say, okay, let me look at your resume. Here are the things that you need to do even before you apply to be able to set yourself up. And so I know we floated around the conversation around bringing talent acquisition to be able to have conversations. Reach out to me. So I have my card. We can do that. That's very, very easy. And include in not just police officers, as we said, but civilian roles as well. Like even coming on as clerk are ways that you get in. Some people have also continued their education and built their education and then moved up in the service that way. Some people came on as 911 call takers, and those are ways. If you can type 60 words a minute, that's the minimum that they're asking for. So practice, but they give you ideas in regards to what you need to do to build that.
Thank you for that, Roseanne. We're gonna take our last question, and then we're gonna just open it up to informal dialogue where everyone can just mingle and ask any questions, but this is our last question of the night.
So this question was asked by one of the members of the audience, and their question was in regards to they're a new Somali Canadian. They came from the country fairly new here, and this is their experience. They were pulled over, and because English is not their first language, they were received a ticket. And they said that they could sense that the body language from the police officer was in the sense of taking advantage of them because it's not their first language, and they didn't try to make the effort to try to hear them out, receive the ticket, and were on their way. And he said that it's not just him that experienced this, but it was many new Canadians that came from Somalia that experienced this as well. So what would they do if they were to experience this type of bias or arrogance towards them?
So I think I always try not to speak for experiences that other officers, this happened and this happened, because I wasn't there. I can only ever talk about what I would do in a certain situation. What I can say is that incivility is a huge complaint, right? That still happens amongst law enforcement, I think, everywhere. And I always say that you can do something, still do your job, do enforcement, and still let people have their dignity, right? And I think that's what we really do push. And I would say 99% of officers do that. But if that one person, your one interaction is negative, that influences you for the rest of your life and the people around you, right? So we talked about trust, how it comes in, it takes a very long time to build, but it can be lost like that, right? So we understand that. I would say that we have ways, if you talk to that officer, if they talk to that officer and they're not getting the response that they like, there are other ways to go about doing that. That is going in and seeing a supervisor at the local division. If you're not comfortable doing that, they can reach out by phone or by email to the unit commander. All of that information is online. And if they're not comfortable reaching out to the Toronto Police Service, they can lodge that complaint with the OIPRD, who's completely independent of the police service. And they can say, we have this, it might be minor in nature, but it might be worth a conversation between a supervisor and an officer. And I mean, we have body-worn cameras, we have in-car cameras, everything's recorded now. Times have changed, right? So there's a lot more accountability than there used to be. So again, I can't speak for anybody else's experiences. I can only tell you what I would do, what we encourage all of our officers to do, what I see the majority of the time. But all it takes is that one bad experience. I remember the first time I had an encounter with a police officer, and that can really, really shade how you see for the rest of your life, right? So we always hope that it's a positive one, but that's not always the case, and that's why we're here.
Thank you so much for that, Kelly. And that concludes our formal questions that we have for today. We're just gonna have very shortly Liban Hassan give some brief remarks, but I want to first, so we'll give it to him.
Thank you, Asha. Hi everyone, my name is Liban Hassan and I'm running for TDSB trustee, York Southwestern. So today I joined this meeting late, but from what I understand, it's about how to better the engagement between Toronto Police and the Somali community. So a lot of these systemic issues that we discussed today, or that the Toronto Police and the panel were discussing, ultimately, I think a lot of these can be addressed at the grassroots level, community-based, right? So as a trustee, I'll be overseeing 25 schools in York Southwestern, and I'll be responsible for advocating for more programs and policies that better the community. So there's something called equity-based policy making and program making, and when we look at certain communities in certain wards, we can see that some communities need a little bit more help than others, and Somali community is one of those. There was a study that many of you are familiar with over 10 years ago from the Fraser Institute that reported Somali students have the highest dropout rate. Since then, it's gotten better, but a recent study that I read, I'm not sure of the advocacy group, don't quote me, but it said that 4 out of 5 Somalis graduate high school on time. So what's happening to the other 20%, right? The 1 out of 5. So a lot of these issues may be trickling over into the systemic issues that we're talking about with guns, gangs, and violence. So one of the things I advocate for is an equity-based policy making. Is that we have 25 schools, and certain pockets in York Southwestern where the Somali community are heavily populated, we can use those schools from 3 to 9 p.m. Schools done around 2-3 p.m. We can create more extracurricular programs. We can create more tutoring and after-school programs that cater to our community. We struggle in English and math. That's what the studies show. So we can have tutoring programs that cater to that, and we can have extracurriculars that keep these students off the streets and keep them engaged. So idle time can be our worst enemy, and I think that's one of the problems facing our community. So what I'm asking for today is those of you who do live in York Southwestern to please come out and vote. I do get the results for the advanced voting. It's done today at 7 p.m. and a lot of our community is not coming out. And a lot of us probably think that it's like, okay, voting, how does it affect me? How does it affect our community? It really does play a big role. So what I'm asking is October 24th is election day. Please come out and vote, especially the youth, 18 to 25-year-olds. You guys don't vote. So I really need your support. And many of you don't live in York Southwestern, but you guys can spread the word to family and friends. And so thank you so much for letting me speak, and I hope you guys can support me.
waa tahay haddaba dhammaadka barnaamijka ayaan waxaa noo suura gashay inaan waraysanno qaar ka mid a dadkii ka soo qayb galay iyo sidoo kale ururka Today madaxdooda oo kulankan soo qabanqaabiyay hadalladoodiina waxaa ka mid ahaa cabdishaaq soo dhawow madaxda ururka Today aad ka mid tahay oo barnaamijkan soo qabanqaabiyay waxay ga warantaa bal muhiimadda kulamadan oo kale bulshadana u leeyahay
kulankan waxaan u soo qabanqaabinay muhiimadiisa koowaad waxay ahayd inay is arkaan ama su'aalo u weydiiyaan dhalinyarada youthka iyo askarta booliska magaaladan maadaama ay yihiin dadka aad iyo aadka maalmahan dambe ka dhaxeeyo arrimo badan oo ah dhalinyarada Soomaalida oo booliska la diilgareen toos ula diilgareen marka waxaan isku daynay maanta in aan hor fariisino dhalinyaradii Soomaaliyeed iyo askarta isoo fariisano ay si su'aalaan ayna iska jaahil bixiyaan waxyaalaha mugdiga ku dhex jira labadooda
arrinta dhibaatooyinka haysta dhalinyarada dilalka iyo wax la midka maxay iskaashigooda labada dhinac ka qaban kartaa
waxay ka qaban kartaa maadaama ay tahay horta waxa la yiraahdo crime-ka ama dambi falka uu nolosha guud ahaan saameeyo wuxuu saameynayaa xaafadda iskuulkeeda waxbarashadeeda wuxuu saameynayaa shaqada wuxuu saameynayaa waalidka oo walwal ku jiro wuxuu saameynayaa dhalinyarada maadaama waxaasoo dhan ay ka dambayso dambiyada dhaco waxaa mas'uul ah booliska marka haddii booliska iyo dhalinyarada wada shaqeeyaan waxaa dhici karto inay dambiyadaas yaraadaan haddii dambiyadaas yaraadaanna inay dhalinyarada horumar gaaraan xagga iskuulka xagga shaqada ay waalidkana madaxooda dego ay walwalka badan ka baxaan maadaama waalidku walwal badan haayo markuu wiilka soo daaho ama gabadha soo daahdo arrimahaas bay keenaysaa
soo dhawow waxay ga warantaa bal muhiimadda dhalinyarada iyo booliisku inay wada fadhiistaan ay wada hadlaan ay dhalinyar ahaan idin leedahay muhiimadda idin leedahay
muhiimad waxa ahay dhalinyaraha iyo booliiska ma isfahmayaan dhibka ahaato waxa way marka booliiska la waco koo waxay u malaynayaan in anaka dhibka soo raadsanaan ama bistooladii waxaas anaka inaan rabno marka su'aalo la isweydiiyo mana maqlaayo sababta waxaan aan sameynay aan dadaal iyo culays inaan isku saarnay booliska waxa way inayna maqlaan the next step waxa way inaan aragno booliska waxay dhaheen in socodka inuu ka daba xiganayo inaan aragno waxay dhahayaan inay run ahaato waay that's the next step and if not culays saarena waa sii saarena
maantii runtii macnaha sida aan farxadda aan meeshan ka dareemay iyo reenreenka aan ka dareemay ilaahay unbaa og waxaan helnay dad yar oo waddankan ku dhashay ku koray wax ku bartay caqligoodana uu adduunka dhan ka weyn yahay marka waxaan helnay dad yar macnaha oo yar oo macnaha oo dhalinyaro ah oo runtii systemka oo dhibka nagu haayo ama waxa annaga aan tirsanayno oo runtii si saxa u maaragtay falanqaynayo oo macnaha dadkii la rabay in saxa loola hadlaayo so marka aniga personally waxaan u soo istaagay hadda marka waraysiga in aan dhaho adeer magaca caasho huda wacays iyo zaak afartooda maasha allah kulli community horta waa inaan u duceyno communitygana waa inaan ogaano these are the most beautiful people that we have thus far waxaan u baahannahay communitygeenna inaan ogolaano dhallinyaradeenna inayna hoggaamiyaan hoggaanka inay gacanta ku dhigaan because maanta waxa inta ka dhacay it was a testimonial aniga aabbo oo 5 ilmo dhalanahay runtii these young people they made me very proud so these are amazing people masha Allah communityga hal ogaado guriga dhalinyarada idin fadhiso guriga carruurtiina inay yihiin runtii not tomorrow's leaders but today leaders waa inaan ogaano communitygeena hoggaankeeda wuxuu gacanta u galay dadkii istaahilay
weli Bakri Media ayaad nagala socotaan oo barnaamij gaar ah oo ku saabsan dhalinyarada aan idin soo tabinayno booliska magaalada Toronto iyo bulshada Soomaalida oo isku arkeen oo ururka Today uu soo qabanqaabiyay barnaamijka waxaan idin farsameynayay isla markaana idin soo saaray Ali Bakri Sheekh bin Sheekh aniga Xuseen Nur Xaajina waa idin la socodsiinayay intaan mar kale kulmi doono dhammaanteen bahda Bakri Media isku duuban waxaan idinkaga tageynaa sidaas iyo nabadgelyo